I haven't watched a bunch of NBA this year, but I do know that in the NBA it's widely known that the Western Conference is usually the stronger conference and much deeper than the East. Now that script is flipped. The East seems a little bit deeper than the West this year and seems to be a little bit stronger as well. Looking purely at standings to begin with, the West as of Friday have two teams that are under 500 in the playoffs currently, and another that's just one game over. So three teams that are basically hovering around 500 or worse that are in the playoffs right now. That's looking at the bottom of the conference, obviously, or the bottom of the playoffs of the conference. If you move up just a little bit to the top, you see a little bit better with just two teams that don't have double-digit losses. And that is the Spurs with 6 and the Warriors that only have 2. It's kind of surprising that the Spurs have basically kept pace with the Warriors and no one's talking about it. I think that the Spurs are one of the best teams in the league right now, and there's really no one outside the Warriors to compete with them. But I do think that they can compete with the Warriors on a game in, game out, and in a 7-game series. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when the Warriors and Spurs play, as the Warriors haven't really played anyone good, and the Spurs kind of have. I kind of want to see what the game between the Cleveland and the Spurs is, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here. So I'm going to see what that is, see what the Spurs can do and what the Warriors really are, or if they've just played a bad schedule. But after those teams, there's a slight drop off to 2 teams and another lower tier team, but that's not really near 500, but is kind of close. The 3 and 4 seeds are the bigger name teams who have had a history of being good, and those are the Thunder and the Clippers. The teams that I can see coming out of the conference are the Warriors and Spurs, and possibly the Thunder. The Thunder have both Durant and Westbrook, and if they get going, they should be good. The two are the top offensive threats in the league, and I think Westbrook's right up there with Stephen Curry, if he's not better than Curry. And Durant's obviously one of the best shooting small forwards and shooters and everything in the league currently. I don't really see any other team in the West that will even challenge those 3. And to add to that, there are only 6 teams that are not, or there are 6 teams that are not in the playoffs, but they're only 3.5 games out. That's really not very good considering the bottom playoff team is 15 and 20. And on that, there's only one team that's really out of the playoffs currently. That's the Lakers, and they're starting to give it a little bit of a resurgence. I think they're 9 and 20 now. They won the last 2 nights, or no, they won 2 nights ago behind D'Angelo Russell and his 27 against the Kings, and then they lost last night because Kobe decided not to give up the ball. But I digress. That's usually the things that we see from the East year in, year out. But this year it's in the West. Speaking of the East, let's talk about them. They only have one team with single-digit losses, and that's the Cavs. I talked about the fact that 2 teams were under 500 in the West, and that they were in the playoffs. Well, the East has none. In fact, they have a team that's over 500 currently out of the playoffs. And that's usually something we see from the West also. It's definitely a flip script kind of thing early in the year, almost midway through the year actually. But the East also has 3 teams within 2.5 games and 4 within 3.5 of the playoffs' last spot. A lot of people will say that this is because the West plays a lot of the East and beats up on them, and vice versa, but it's actually not true. Both conferences have played a majority of their games, at least 75% for all the teams in conference. So the East has played the East, and the West has played the West 75% of the time, at least so far this year. This just means that in the Eastern Conference, anyone can win the game. It doesn't matter really who's playing who. Cleveland could be playing, well, except for the Sixers. Everyone beats the Sixers. I don't know how they have 4 wins. But you could have Cleveland go out and play the number 8 seed Magic, and the Magic could play them really tough, and it'd make it really a close game. And I think in the West, you don't really see that as much. I think, obviously the Warriors are going to beat about anyone in the West, except for maybe the Spurs or the Thunder. But I think that if you have, the Thunder going up against the Clippers, the Thunder are usually going to win that by a pretty healthy margin. And The East, you don't really have that. You just have, oh, this guy, or the Magic were only lost to the Cavs by 4. Wow, they must be really good this year, and they're the 8th seed kind of thing. I mean, in my opinion, I can see up to 5 teams having a chance win the East. Those being Cleveland, Chicago, Miami, kind of Toronto, and kind of Atlanta. Atlanta has to fix a lot of stuff. They're not as deep as they were last year, but they're still a good team. And Toronto, I think, has a lot of good pieces with Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, a couple other things, but they obviously have some stuff to fix too. I think everyone outside of Cleveland, really, they just tweak a little bit of stuff. They'd have a legitimate shot at winning the East, basically. I think Cleveland's really set with having LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love. And then Chicago, they really need to fix their offense, and they'd be right in the thick of things. They're not having really good offense this season. I think they're averaging under 90 points, and defense is always good, but you still need to have some offense to be able to win some games. They're obviously winning because they're number 2 seed, but anyways, then looking at Miami, they have a lot of young pieces. They have Bosch and Wade still in there. They're really good. I think Justice Winslow's really good. Whiteside's really good. Bosch and Wade, like I said, those 4 are probably the best 4 players on their team. They add another piece to make them really good at the shooting guard. Oh, they have DeRozan too, or not DeRozan. Dragic, that's who they have. They have Dragic, and I think that their starting 5, if they have Winslow in there, is really good, but not really top tier yet. I think that they will finish top 5. I think all those teams will finish top 5, maybe a little flip here and there. Toronto in the 3, Atlanta in the 4, Miami in the 5, whatever. Just those are the 5 teams that will finish top 5. At least top 4 of those teams will finish top 4. And I still think that conference that wins the finals is the West, but more depth. The more depth of the teams, I guess, like how good the teams are, like the quality of opponents and stuff is way higher in the East. Just because about anyone can beat anyone, so they're a little bit better games. Whereas in the West, you're like, oh, like I said earlier, like, oh, Warriors are playing, they're winning. Warriors are playing them, oh, they won. Oh, Warriors won by 30, kind of thing. So you can't predict those games as easily, and I think that's a little bit better for, at least to me. Like, I like watching games where anyone can win it, not like, for example, if the Pats, say the Patriots in 07, where we all knew that they were really good 5 games into the season. I didn't really like that because they weren't really going to lose to anyone, kind of thing. So I just, that's just me. That's just my opinion, that the West is really weak, and it's because they're just really top heavy with those top 2, 3, if you want to count the Thunder, is really good. Top 3 teams that kind of beat up on everyone else in their conference, and whereas the East, they're not as good. And that's kind of a byproduct of having the top picks in the draft too. Like, obviously it's split kind of down the middle, but more of the top half is, like, the top 5 of the lottery is generally East teams. Usually Philly at 1, or Cleveland, depending on if they had LeBron or not, or someone like that, or the Knicks. And that's kind of the byproduct. You're getting good young pieces, and then you're kind of rebuilding it, and rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding. And then they finally all mesh and figure out they're good, and that's kind of what's happening now. Is that everyone in the East is like, oh, we have really good pieces, let's play them. And I think that's kind of why the East is a little bit better. The West doesn't have any youth. I mean, yeah, they have Durant and Westbrook on the Thunder. Clippers are moderately young. I wouldn't consider DeAndre and Blake really any young anymore. Spurs definitely are. They have Durant, who's like 40, Duncan, who's 40, and a bunch of old pieces. But the Warriors are one of the younger teams too. But I still, in my opinion, the West is going to win the conference or win the NBA Finals. No matter if it's the Warriors or Spurs. But Thunder maybe will lose to the Cleveland. There we go. And I think if the Warriors start getting hurt or start missing shots like they're kind of destined to do, the East will start to take over, but I don't really see that really happening in the near future. I do think it'll happen eventually, where their good luck, health-wise, catches up to them, or they can't sustain the three-point barrage that they are doing right now. But that's really something for the future, and I think coming out of this year, or at least out of this first couple weeks of the season, we can kind of tell that the East is kind of resurrecting, and they're going to make a little bit more of a challenge to the Warriors or the West. Especially, it's going to be really interesting to see who wins the All-Star game. That's kind of shows you who the stars or how good each conference is, the All-Star game. So I will have a little bit more to talk about here when that rolls around, see who gets selected and all that stuff. So be on the lookout for maybe a little bit follow-up later in the season. So with that, I think I'm going to stop talking about why the West is weak.